Hello, my name's Lindy Cowling and welcome to my channel. My website is www.lindycowling.co.uk. Email is info@lindycowling.co.uk, and the subject of today's short video is love off the leash. So today I'm going to just talk very briefly about letting love unfold itself from the control, the judgments, the belief systems, the old templating, and letting it unfold and open up like a flower instead of remaining restricted like a bud. So let me give you some examples of this. Love off the leash, untamed love, wild love, sounds like, this all sounds like the name for great raunchy romantic books. Maybe I'll have to write one. All expressions which sum up love that cannot be restricted or contained or tamed by society, by judgment, by other people, even by situations. Now let me clarify that before there are people ringing bells in horror. I'm not advocating a lack of personal responsibility or personal truth or personal authenticity, but I mean honouring not only the love you are, but situations where you find yourself in a situation of profound love for a person or a situation or a project or a movement. It doesn't just have to be one-to-one romantic partnerships or romantic relationships, for example. I'm going to give you an example of a romantic relationship because that's the really easiest one to talk about. For those of you that have seen, I think there was a film, I think it's from the 1940s, and they're always re-releasing it on DVD or it's on TV, Brief Encounter, where a man and a woman meet each other, and they are both the upper classes actually of British society, very posh, both married, both got kids. I think he's a doctor, she's married to somebody, you know, and these two meet each other on a train, and they only meet a few times, but it's a boom, it's a real powerful heart connection, soul connection, and they fall for each other very, very quickly, and they don't do anything about it. I think maybe they have one or two kisses, and they meet for a couple of lunches, and they go to the cinema. They don't do anything about it, even though everything in them is telling them they need to act upon this, and they know they've met the love of their life. And the reason they don't do anything about it is because they don't want to come up against the consequences of making a move on that. So they don't want to come up against the consequences of what that would mean to their respective wives, husbands, children, families, but also the society at the time, what that would mean to actually get divorced in that time in the 1940s, what people would think, what people would say, and so they don't act upon it, and it absolutely is crucifying them. And it's so powerful that the guy who plays the doctor, who's in love with this girl that he met on the train, decides he's going to take a posting abroad so they won't see each other again. So he's removing himself from the scene, and she is so distressed, and she knows it's the only thing to do if they're both going to stay in their marriages and both going to stay in this respectability and conventionality and tamed, restricted, controlled love, that situation, they decide that that's the best thing to do, and she's so distressed that she stands on the edge of the train platform and comes within about a second, very, very close to throwing herself under the train before she steps back. And this is a really, it's a really moving film. It's one of those films everybody gets the tissues out and starts crying at the end, or, well, lots of people do, probably not everybody. In its time, it was considered to be the right thing to have done. They were moral, upstanding, well-respected citizens, these characters, and it was the right thing to do, to not follow their heart, not follow their truth, and to stay ticking over, go back to ticking over, instead of running on full power, really, full power of the heart. And so that would be an example, and I think there were probably thousands of people who watched that film, or perhaps millions, especially over the years as it's been re-released, obviously, that thought, oh, why didn't you just come clean and act upon it? Why didn't you follow your hearts? And there are numerous films and dramas over the years where we see that pattern played out, and the consequences of people not following their hearts, actually, and what happens as a result of that, and the entanglements. Now, that's not to say there's not massive entanglements upon following the heart, but if you undo and unpick all of this, it makes me backtrack to this word that consistently comes up in my videos, and a word that consistently comes up upon the evolution of humanity when we look back over history, but also at this time, and it's the resistance to change. It's that resistance to what change brings. And wild love, untamed love, any love that is powered by the source, the creation source from the heart, any unrestricted love from there, cannot be bent and controlled and manipulated into conventional society and the conventional ways that we have now, because it's not supposed to be. We can all make choices to follow our hearts, not just on romantic terms, but in other terms, like I say, across the board, in all human interaction and dynamics. We can make choices to do that, and of course there will be consequences of doing that, because all change brings about consequences. Sometimes those consequences can feel quite devastating. Often they bring about immense growth of the spirit, immense experience for the soul. But it all comes back to one thing. If we want to be absolutely authentic, absolutely coming from our spirit, absolutely coming from our soul, absolutely coming from that transparency, then in a gentle way, in a loving way, perhaps we need to be open to the idea of change, open to the idea of thinking outside of the box, you know, outside of a box that perhaps millions of us didn't even realize we were in. We have to perhaps allow ourselves to be unconventional. There doesn't have to be a recklessness with that. It's a balancing act. It's a balancing act. I guess what I would say, for love to be wild, wild love, untamed love, love off the leash, it is actually the opposite of what you would think it is. It is authenticity. It's being very open about how one feels. It's coming from that space. So it's complete opposite of furtiveness or manipulation or control. It's actually being really authentic. You see, going back to that example again, that 1940s film Brief Encounter, if they were really being true to themselves, because they were being torn apart, going apart from one another, they were really being honest with themselves, perhaps they would have gone home and sat down with their respective partners and explained the situation. And you've got to ask yourself why they didn't do that. Did they not love each other enough? No, I think we could all see and feel how much they loved each other, the characters there. But the underlying thing there was the fear of change, the fear of what other people would say about that change, the consequences of that change. And that was more powerful to them at that time than actually following their heart. See, I always feel, and in my experience, I would always say that if you are coming from that loving space of the heart, if you are coming from there, and that honesty and that truthfulness, then because you are coming from a different frequency, a higher frequency, a more peaceful frequency, all change can be navigated more harmoniously. And that is not to say that because you're coming from that space that everybody else around you is coming from that space, so other people might kick off and react in certain ways, but I still maintain that provided you're coming from that space of love, then it really isn't and doesn't have the capacity to do the same level of damage and cause the same amount of trauma, because you're coming from that peaceful frequency. It's easy to use this term, wild love, untamed love, love off the leash, when talking about personal relationships. But this would apply to everything, you know, your love of a life change, a profound life change, your love of a sport, your love of an activity, a hobby, something that you want to change in terms of your career, your job. It might even relate to changing the way you look. It might even relate to being open about your sexuality. I mean, there are no limitations to this. Wild love, love off the leash, love untamed applies to the love you are in unrestricted form, because the love you are is actually unrestricted form. What restricts it is the expectations piled on around it. Most of those expectations aren't ours. Most of them have been imprinted, downloaded or programmed into us. Again, I'm the complete opposite of advocating the abdication of all, in some ways, moral responsibility. That sounds very heavy. But I am absolutely in favour of honouring who you truly are, who we truly are, because that is true empowerment. When you get to a stage where you can be that honest with yourself and others around you, then you give the capacity for wild love, love of the leash, love untamed, to flow within you, through you, and from you. And therefore you are elevating that vibration and giving that allowance, that permission, making it possible for those around you to adopt the same vibration. And on that note, I will love you and leave you. And wherever you are in your lives, wherever you are in the world, may you be embracing wild love yourself. Thank you. Bye-bye.